Hey guys, I know it's Thursday morning. I just kind of want to go ahead and get these slides out of the way uh, and kind of discuss a couple things before we get into the slides. Um, so, first things first, lesson plan questions. I know some of you guys asked me yesterday uh, some of the questions or things that look like questions. Uh, those are your standards. Those are standards that we as teachers are held to when we teach classes. So the assignment that I believe I asked you guys to do was just discuss when Hitler could be stopped, when he could have been stopped, or if he could have been stopped, and then talk about this 3-page paper. Those are the only assignments. So I think moving forward, going into lesson plans, we're just not going to worry about the standards, just so we can eliminate all the confusion. And then also for your papers, I know many of you guys are taking up that, hey, I want to go ahead and I'll turn in my paper on Friday, and that's fine. That's completely fine, guys. But I know that a number of you guys have turned it in early, and I think that kind of gives you guys that have turned it in early kind of gives you an advantage because it gives you time to make corrections. I know a few of you guys, I've sent your papers back and said, look, this is not good enough. If you wait till 6 o'clock Friday night, you don't have any time. There's no more time. So whatever you send in is going to get graded. And some of you guys have kind of shocked me on poor grammar, poor grammatical sentence structure. Though I'm not necessarily grading for that right now. I mean, I'm not trying to be an English professor on this. I'm looking mostly for your content, but I definitely think if you guys move into college, y'all need to go to some writing centers just because of the misspelled words and poor sentence structure and poor spelling, just all over the place. So, with all that being said, I think it's. I know that you guys have a lot of work going on, and it would be. I would say it'd be better for you if you could try to find a way to turn in a paper, and then from that, rework it. I'll be happy to help you guys out in any way that I can, but always try to get in the habit of when you get papers and projects and things like that. Always try to turn them in, especially for you guys that want to go to college. Always try to turn them in early so that you can kind of get feedback from your professor on if it's acceptable, if it's not acceptable, and that way you have time to go back and fix it before things are actually due for real. So just a little word of advice there. But today we're actually going to move into the Battle of Britain, and there's about 5 slides here, but a ton of information, so I want to go ahead and dive into it. So we've already talked about how Hitler has just wiped out France, took out the best army in 35 days. And Hitler really isn't. I mean, he's all about some world domination, but he doesn't want to attack Britain. He loves Britain. He's always admired Britain, and so he says, "Look, Churchill, let's just come to peace on this. Let's be friends here." Well, Hitler, of course, kind of has this backseat plan that what he wants to do is create peace with Britain. That way, he doesn't have to worry about his western flank, his western borders, and can focus more of his forces on taking out the Soviet Union. Well, Churchill is not biting on that. He is not trying to be this man of appeasement the way the rest of the politicians had been before the war. When Hitler says, "Look, man, let's come to terms," he basically says, "Look, you've opened this can of worms, and now you're going to deal with it." And so he refuses. He absolutely refuses to negotiate with Hitler, and he's actually quoted with saying, "I will not talk with that man." So, yeah, and then in order to send an even stronger message that the British are not going to negotiate, seeing that the French had been captured, most of the French fleet was actually anchored off the coast of Algeria, and the British were scared that now that France had fallen into German hands, the Germans would use French ships to help in their battle for superiority of the seas, and help with a land invasion. So Churchill sends his ships down to Algeria, and they demand the French either, number one, go to a neutral port where they can stay, or come join the British fleet in their ports. And the French refuse. So the British open fire and severely damage or sink three or four ships. And Churchill actually later says that it was probably one of his most, I wouldn't say it's a regrettable action, but he definitely didn't like it. I mean, he's attacking his former ally, but he was doing it because he didn't want the Germans to take those ships and use it against him. So, I mean, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So, Hitler kind of feels disrespected. He's like, how dare these guys? They're beaten. They should be coming to terms. There's no way they can stand up to the might of the German military. And so he decides, since he believed they were on their knees, he decided that we're going to go ahead and start an operation. And this is a planned operation that was supposed to be, I think, in either late September or early October, but it was called Operation Sea Lion, and it's a sea landing. They're going to land on Britain, but they don't have the Navy to protect them in the English Channel. They can't just send a bunch of German ships out there and say, okay, we're going to block the way, you guys go, because the German Navy can't stand up to the British Navy. And the only advantage they really have at this point is their Air Force. The Germans have, over 3,000 fighter bombers, fighter planes, and bombers. The British only have about 700 fighter planes. So they have a massive numerical advantage, and the Germans hope to use that. So, with the Luftwaffe outnumbering the British around 2-1, Hitler hoped that he could lure the RAF out and destroy them. But the RAF commanders are a little bit smarter. They don't actually go over. They don't really go defend British shipping that much. They do it early on, but they kind of back off a little bit because they can't deal with the losses that they don't want to get worn down. Basically, is what they're doing. So when the Germans attack British ships in the Channel, the fighters don't do anything. The only time they actually jump out and attack the Germans is when they look like they're about to start a bombing raid. So the Germans have an aircraft, and you guys can see here in this picture, the one with the black cross on it is the Messerschmitt 109, also known as an Me-109. It was the most advanced fighter of the day. It could climb faster, turn faster, had more firepower than most planes at that era. The one that could keep up with it the most was the Supermarine Spitfire. It was a British version of the Me-109, but even a little more agile. So in a sense, it was just a little bit better than the Me-109. However, this fighter only made up 1/3 of the British force. The other 2/3 was made up of the Hawker Hurricane. It was a slower fighter, still more agile than the Me-109, but could take a lot more punch, could take a lot more damage, and could deal a lot more damage with its firepower. So the Germans are arrogant, and they think that they're going to knock the British out of the war with just a single blow. And on July 10th, these German bombers decide they're going to target a convoy in the English Channel. And when they show up, they're kind of stunned to find out that the British fighters are also there. It's as if they've been waiting on them the whole time. So the Germans, they lose 10 aircraft, and they only sink one ship in this debacle. They kind of get surprised, caught with their pants down, and they get a little bit embarrassed. So this is going to be kind of where Britain or Germany kind of starts falling into their mistake. There's a guy named Schmidt, Beppo Schmidt, and he is actually underneath the Luftwaffe general, if you will, Hermann Göring. And he actually tells Hermann Goring that the Luftwaffe has done a lot more damage than it actually has. And so he's kind of fluffing the numbers, which is not exactly helpful because all the tactics that Hermann Goring is making is based off of the losses that either he is taking or that he believes the British are taking. And if you're giving him inflated numbers, he thinks he's doing better than he actually is. So Hitler starts putting every effort into preparing for the sea invasion. These guys, they bring in sea barges from all over the occupied territories. They start turning them into ships and landing craft. And on the 13th of August, the Luftwaffe launched a massive bombing campaign in the hopes of pushing the RAF, which a lot of their forces were kind of stationed in the south, forces further inland and away from the coast so they could have space to land. Well, this backfires a lot. 47 German planes were lost. 86 pilots are killed or captured or missing. And RAF only lose about 13 fighters. So the Germans were insanely overconfident, and they were unaware that the British had something that no one really had at the time. It was early warning radar. Now, the name of these towers that you see here in the picture was called Chain Home. There was another set that would detect planes at a lower altitude, and so you couldn't really fly up underneath them. But they could detect aircraft from 120 miles away. So basically, as soon as the aircraft would take off in northern France, they already knew. The British already knew they were coming. Now, the limitation that the Chain Home had was that they did not have the ability to know necessarily how high planes were, which is kind of an important thing to know. If you fly out there to intercept a group of bombers, and they're at 30,000 feet and you're at 10,000 feet, you're never going to see them. So they had this group of 30,000 volunteers with these instruments that could detect bearing, distance, and height of these formations. And then they would relay it back to Fighter Command. And it only took about 40 seconds to send this information around and get it back to where the fighters could use it. So Germany over these few days is kind of taking a beating, and like I said, the German mistake number two was that Beppo Schmidt was vastly inflating German losses. He had claimed that instead of the 13 fighters that the RAF had actually lost on August 13th, he claimed that the RAF had lost 70 fighters. Well, the Germans knew that the RAF only had about 700 planes. So they're like, oh, hey, yeah, we're doing great. We're just going to keep doing this and we'll eventually wear them down. And he doesn't think, Beppo Schmidt doesn't think that these bombed airfields, because originally that is kind of what the Germans are going after, is that these bombed airfields are going to be able to be repaired and that the damaged planes are going to be repaired. In reality, the bombed airfields are being filled in and the planes are being repaired and everything's ready to go in 24 hours. And so even the bombing stations, or even the radar stations. So when the Germans would bomb them, most of the time, the British would just get them right back up in 24 hours. And so it was like they really weren't doing anything to them. So the Germans actually, as they're losing fighters, British personnel, of course, when they go to these down fighters, they put the fires out and they get the personnel out, either capture them or just, bury them. But they come across a code that they find that these pilots are using, and it's called Knickbein. And what they determine that it is a radio navigation system that the Germans can use for night raids. And so this is kind of the British are kind of like, oh crap. So this is how the Germans are going to be able to navigate at night. They haven't done it just yet, but they're about to. And so Goring decides he's going to attack the northeast of Britain at this time. Again, still daylight raids. They haven't moved to night just yet. In hopes that the British defenses are weaker there. So he kind of feels like, well, maybe we'll just go around the radar stations. Well, on August 15th, he launches another maximum effort of bombing raid. And these are just hundreds of planes that are coming in. Well, the German planes shoot down 32 RAF fighters, but the RAF also shoot down 75 German planes. So Goring makes a makes a tactical decision to ask his Messerschmitt 109s to stay tighter to the Stuka bombers. See, the Stuka bombers were like the pride and joy of the Germans, and they were very, very effective in the early parts of the war, but they were slower, and when you brought them against competent fighter pilots, they got destroyed. So Goring's asking these guys, his German pilot, his fighter pilots, listen, you got to stay close to the Stuka dive bombers, kind of like the way the Red Tail pilots did to bombers in World War II. For us, these guys, they just stay close. Well, it kind of shocks a lot of the German pilots because now they're having to slow down almost 100 miles an hour slower than they normally would be, and they don't feel like they're able to use their advantage as much. But it works. This tactic really kind of sets the RAF back a little bit. They sustain a lot of losses, and Goring is unaware of this. So this is mistake number 3. He's unaware that his tactics are actually working, and that it's slowly starting to wear the RAF down, and he actually unnecessarily switches his tactics to night bombing. Had he kept going, the British would never have been able to withstand this. Their airfields were getting bombed a lot more. Supply lines were getting bombed. Planes were taking heavier damage. So had he kept this up, the British were eventually going to wear down. But he makes that mistake. He says, look, we're going to go ahead and move to night raids. Now, there's a couple things with these night raids. They start bombing cities, and they stop bombing airfields. Okay? So this is very important, because now the British pilots can't fly at night. They can't navigate at night. So now that you've moved to bombing cities and factories, you're not bombing fighter planes and airfields. So this actually gives British Air Force and British Fighter Command a chance to rest. This gives them a chance to repair the airfields, get damaged aircraft fixed, retrain new pilots over this course where the Germans only bomb at night. So on September 7th, the Luftwaffe actually assembles 700 aircraft and decide they're going to go for a big night or a big air raid on London. And the Luftwaffe will then return at night, and they'll do this for the next 57 nights except for one. But they sustain. I'm kind of getting myself mixed up here. So this is when they're actually doing the night bombing. But by mid-September, the Luftwaffe is no closer to beating the British back at all. So intelligence is coming through that the RAF was on their last leg. Again, misled. And on September 15th, this is when the Germans really send their big roll of the dice, their massive formations. And these 275 RAF fighters meet a set of 145 German bombers, smack them around a little bit, and then come back. And then after lunch, another main raid hits of about 475 German aircraft. And the RAF reassemble again. They go back at them. They down 56 German aircraft and only lose about 28 RAF losses in a ratio that is exactly 2-1. So the things that we kind of get from this is that the Germans would never really recover. This time, this attrition, this war of attrition that they're employing almost at the Battle of Britain, they never recover from this. These fighters that they lose in this battle for Britain, probably could have used them in the Eastern Front. But all of this, they find out with these losses on September 15th that the British are no closer to being defeated than they were when the whole thing began. And so Hitler just kind of backs off and he says, look, we're just going to postpone this invasion indefinitely. Now, Hitler just kind of saw it as a thorn in his side. He just thought, okay, this really is just a minor setback. But as I said, it kind of was a lot bigger than he thought it was. They had lost a lot of fighters, a lot of bombers, and they weren't able to replace them at the rate that the British and the Americans can. And now the Americans, of course, are not in this yet, but the Americans and British are eventually going to be able to build things at such a rate that even by the Germans sinking so many of them, they can't sink all of them because they're being built as fast as they're being sunk. So, just another set of information here, but is that during this battle, you have a guy named Sergeant Ray Holmes, and he actually uses his plane to crash into a German bomber that was headed for Buckingham Palace. And I mistakenly put the Queen's residence. At the time, it was actually King George that was actually staying in the residence, so it should have been called the King's residence. But Ray was flying in a Hawker Hurricane. He saw this bomber heading for Buckingham Palace, and he's out of ammunition. And so he does this really bold move where he uses the wing of his plane to slice off the tail of the German bomber. And it works. The German bomber careens out of control, crashes into Victoria Station, and Sergeant Holmes is actually able to bail out. And he lived, I think, until the age of 90 and died in 2005. So that's kind of the wrap up, guys, of the Battle of Britain. And next week we'll pick up with the siege of Stalingrad. We'll pick up with D-Day and North Africa and Italy. So hope you guys enjoy your weekend. Make sure you get those papers in, and I'll speak to you guys next week. Bye.